It's Tuesday, March 26th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, and joining me to do just that is Derrik Klassen of Bleacher Report, doing some scouting over there, obviously doing some charting work for us at receptionperception.com. Derrik, what's going on, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. I mean, we are in this feels like not quite the final stretch, but I'm like kind of past all charting the like truly good quarterbacks. So it feels like we're kind of in the home stretch here for sure.
Yeah, you might feel that way. I feel like, oh my God, I'm kind of in like cram mode because I spent so much time on free agents that, you know, my prep for wide receivers is a little bit pushed back. So I'm trying to just get up to speed on as many of these receiver prospects as I can here heading into the draft, and plus preparing for every other position as well. So it's a lot of work to do over the next month, but I love this time of year. It's super fun, and the people are passionate about their draft coverage, is why we've fully leaned in here over the next month. Of course, if you've been paying attention, you've been subscribed to the podcast, you know we are all in on NFL draft coverage leading up to the NFL draft, and of course the few weeks after. We just put out a Mock Draft Monday episode, our first one of that series. You can check that out. That dropped with Nate Tice yesterday. On Thursday, we're going to be back to the skill position prospects with Charles McDonald. This week, we're going to focus on running backs. But today, Tuesday, we start our teams that will shape the draft series. And I thought Derrik was a natural guest to bring on for this, because for this episode, we're going to focus on the teams with the first three picks. And obviously, as you heard me say up the top, Derrik is a quarterback charting wizard. I hate the term guru, or I never know what to say, because Derrik, I'm sure you feel like me. I don't love when people say like wide receiver expert or wide receiver guru, but Derrik has his nose to the grindstone charting quarterbacks, and obviously these three picks are going to be quarterbacks one way or another, so he was a natural guest for this one. So, I mean, Commanders, Patriots, we got some big-time teams to break down here, Derrik.
I will say I also hate that term, the guru term. It makes me sound like I know everything, and obviously nobody does. Wizard sounds better, because I do a lot of nerdy gaming type stuff, and I feel like that fits the brand a little bit better. So might have to start rolling with Wizard. Maybe that works a little bit better.
Wizard is good. And by the way, you're gonna hear what a super cool guy I am. But my wife and I just watched the extended edition of Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship, and then The Two Towers over the weekend. And listen, Gandalf wasn't right about everything. I mean, he had things figured out by the end of it, and like all things worked out well. And I'd like to say that, just like you and I are basically Gandalf, bro. Like we're not right about everything. We don't have everything figured out, but we're trying to get you to the right destination in the end, even if we don't have, like I said, we don't have it all figured out. So there you go. The Wizard is what we will settle on. Obviously, there was some big news in the NFL this week. We're not going to have a big discussion here on the new kickoff rules, the new trade deadline, although I love the trade deadline being pushed back. If you want to hear more about that, go check out Yahoo's NFL Pod, the Zero Blitz podcast feed. I'm sure Charles Robinson and Jory Epstein and Jason Fitz will have everything you need over there. So if you want that coverage, definitely go check that out. But let's jump into the meat of the show here, Derrik. Like I said, we are going to be talking about these top three teams here, because they're a natural grouping in terms of teams that will shape the draft. They're the first three picks in the draft, and they overall feel like, again, one team I think is a trade out candidate. The other two are definitely not, but one way or another, I think these top three picks are all going to be quarterbacks. But let's start at the very top with the Chicago Bears, Derrik, because I think they are, and you can, brainstorm this one with me, but to me, they feel like a very unique first overall team, because one, obviously we know this is not their native pick, and they're not a team that had to give up a bunch of assets to get this top pick, because they were just gifted it by the Carolina Panthers. This is the team that finished 11th in weighted DVOA by the end of the season. They have invested in their offense. So we think they're picking quarterback here first off. They are picking quarterback. I think we know which quarterback they're picking. It's going to be Caleb Williams. And they're set up to really drop in a quarterback and I think go to work here.
Everyone keeps talking about Minnesota being like the godsend spot for a quarterback to be. And I think it is. I think when you have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, the tackles they have, Kevin O'Connell, that is probably the best spot for a quarterback. Chicago's not far off, man. This is a really, really good spot to get dropped into. Like, I think their tackle situation is actually good. I like Darnell Wright coming out of the draft last year. I thought he had a solid rookie year at right tackle. Left tackle Braxton Jones. Look, he's not like an all-pro. He might not even be a Pro Bowler, but like he to me, gets over the bar of like, this is a competent, solid left tackle. We don't need to worry about this. Obviously, they go trade for Keenan Allen. They already have DJ Moore. Like, the defense is, I mean, one or two more pieces, it's probably a top 10 unit, right? So like, you drop a rookie quarterback into this, any rookie quarterback, let alone somebody as talented as Caleb Williams, it's like, this team should win double-digit games, right? Like, they already kind of showed that towards the end of last year. I think they kind of had the capacity to do that as a team. You drop Caleb Williams in there with, again, they'll probably draft another receiver or another defensive player or something like that in the first round. This team's kind of cooking. Like, they're in a good spot for a rookie for sure.
Yeah, it's not perfect. Like you said, there are nits to pick here. I'm not 100% sure like what my feelings are on DeAndre Swift as a running back, but they have some other options in that room there too. I think they definitely need a third receiver beyond these top two guys. I don't know if Tyler Scott's going to develop into that dude. I think there are nits to pick here, but overall, like, and I've said this especially as a receiver guy, Derek, that, Keenan Allen, very, very good player. I kind of balk at the idea that, he's still at the like premier kind of part of his game. I don't think that's true. And I'm sure as somebody that's watched a lot of Justin Herbert, it's funny, Derek, that like people are like, man, Keenan Allen is still balling out, but damn, they just keep throwing the ball short. Like, why don't they push the ball down the field? I'm like, well,
can only throw it as far as your receivers can run, my friends.
Exactly.
It's important to note.
But the good part about that here in Chicago is that DJ Moore is like a true vertical X receiver. And I think he can be moved around and maximized in different spots, but he can give you that vertical element. So these two guys really work off each other. And that's what's like, do you remember another time where a rookie quarterback, like in recent memory, not definitely a first overall pick, but even a rookie quarterback was dropped into a group that was this good at the top two receiver positions?
I mean, it's funny you mentioned Herbert. He's probably like the closest, right, in recent memory, because he would have had Keenan, obviously, and then Mike Williams. So, like, that's probably the closest. You can debate if DJ Moore is better than Mike or whatever, but like that to me is probably the first one that comes to my mind, just in terms of like, I mean, I'm not going to count like Brock Purdy. Like, that's such a ridiculous situation. But in terms of guys who are being drafted like top 5, top 10, whatever, in terms of your top two receivers, this probably is about as good as it gets. Yeah.
Yeah, I would go DJ Moore over Mike Williams, but obviously like Keenan Allen a few years ago was better than Keenan Allen right now. Even if Keenan Allen is still a very, very good possession receiver, I think he's going to work really well with DJ Moore. So I'm curious your thoughts, just one overall on Caleb Williams as a prospect, because I don't think we need to mince words here. I don't think we need to beat around the bush. Like, they're taking Caleb Williams first overall. We obviously broke this down with Charles McDonald on the last podcast, but it's always good to get multiple perspectives on these quarterbacks. And obviously, Derek, I mean, you chart quarterbacks for my website. I clearly value your opinion very highly on these players. So what do you think about Caleb, like his charting profile, his overall film? Like, where does he sort of stack up as a prospect? And then if you want to talk about him specifically with these players on this roster and Shane Waldron's offense, go for that as well.
Yeah, people put like too much on him with he's the next Patrick Mahomes, blah, blah, blah. But he is a damn good prospect, man. Mm-hmm. Like, he is truly incredible. He's on the smaller side, but he's really not that small. Like, he's like 6'1", 220. Like, that's not a big guy, but it's not like the Kyler Murray situation or Bryce Young last year or anything. Like, he's not that kind of small. And then the arm talent, dude, like the arm talent is truly one of the best that I've ever seen. It's not just that he throws it far. It's not just that he throws it hard. It's not just that he can throw outside the pocket. It's that he gets to arm angles that seem impossible. And I think that's the only area where I see Mahomes is like, Mahomes will have 2-3 throws a game where it's like, I don't understand, one, how you physically can get that ball out. Two, how you even think to get the ball out that way. Mm-hmm. Caleb has a lot of that, where he'll do that 2-3 times a game, where it's just like, I never seen that before. But I mean, if you're going to make it work, then make it work. And I think he's incredible in that way. And then I think just across the field, his accuracy is phenomenal. Like, I think he's a really good quick game passer. I think he's really good throwing intermediate stuff. Like, some of the touch he can put on like corners and stuff like that is really, really pretty. And then down the field, I think he's about as good as anybody. So, and then I think the last thing I want to touch on with him is pocket management, because I think with smaller quarterbacks, that tends to be an issue of like, is he going to be able to see over guys? Is he going to be able to throw over guys? Is he going to be comfortable standing in the pocket when it's typically tougher to see as a shorter quarterback? I don't worry about that even a smidgen with Caleb Williams. Like, he is so good at just firm base, eyes up. I'm playing to throw the ball down the field. And if I get hit, I get hit. Obviously, there are a couple instances where he'll look to bail early, but like it's not as bad as like Jalen Hurts. You know, Jalen Hurts to me is the guy who like pressure, boom, he's gone out.
Yeah.
Like he's looking to go. Caleb is not like that at all. Caleb will happen when he knows that's the only option sometimes, but he's pretty good about staying, you know, standing firm, throwing down the field, taking hits, all that sort of stuff. So Caleb to me is like, I don't know, man. Arm talent and pocket management are like non-negotiables, and he's got them in spades, dude. Like it's kind of that simple to me.
I'm with you that those are two like non-negotiables if you're going to get into the top 1 or 2 tiers as a quarterback. And Jalen Hurts is actually a great example. And I feel like this is not the last podcast that we've bagged on Jalen Hurts here on the feed. So I do feel kind of bad because I really like Jalen Hurts as a quarterback and as a player. But like he's a great example of, I agree with you. He has arm talent, but when plays break down and just like managing a pocket, it can really get messy really quick. And watching Caleb Williams, I think that's the biggest thing that people want to know from a quarterback guy like yourself. When he has to play in structure, even not even just like when the play breaks down and stuff like that. Because I think that's kind of the biggest question with him is just like we see the highlight reel throws and the creative arm angles. And I'm with you that like, again, those are non-negotiables to get into the top tier, right? Like in today's NFL, you have to manage the pocket well, and you have to be like a creative thrower under pressure. Like you have to be able to work those arm angles and stuff like that. But I get caught up with what Nate Tice said on the Super Bowl preview show on this podcast, which is Mahomes became Mahomes not just because of the crazy arm angles and sort of like the ability to create out of structure. It was his just like being okay with being bored, like being boring as an offensive player, and like the literally the field general sort of stereotype. That was where he kind of took his game to this elite level. In your opinion, does Caleb Williams sort of have that in his bag?
I think he does, like way more than people give him credit for. I think it's easy when you watch him like on Saturdays when he's just doing whatever the hell outside the pocket, 6 seconds running around doing whatever. It's really easy to be like, oh, this guy is just kind of playing his own game. He's not really playing to the tune, to the rhythm of the offense. You watch him on film, you watch this offense on film, dude, the offense sucks. Like I wouldn't want to play in structure at USC either. Like it's completely BS offense. Like I'm pretty like, I don't like most college offenses, but I think at USC at USC I think they just had trouble this year. I think Lincoln didn't really know what he wanted to do with his offense when he didn't have the big boys up front that he had at Oklahoma. And I think that kind of just like racked the offense a little bit. And I think you saw Caleb kind of not trust the offense at times because of that. But I think you still saw enough instances where in the few circumstances where they did call like true drop back stuff, he could go like 1 to 2 to 3, play in structure, get to the right spot. I think people are probably going to harp on him for like not throwing that many checkdowns, but I just don't really think that was like part of the offensive formula to even have that. Like the check down was like, Caleb, go do something. We need you to do something because we're down by 14 points in the early second quarter. So I think actually Caleb, it's interesting because I think he's really, really going to benefit from the increased structure that you get in the NFL. Like, I think people are like, oh, is he going to take to it? Well, I think he like needs it. And I think he's going to benefit from actually getting that for the first time, really.
I wonder if the signing of DeAndre Swift is kind of part of that, because I think Swift is a little overrated as a receiving back. Like he's not, people kind of confused when the Lions draft, like they get rid of DeAndre Swift and they draft Jahmyr Gibbs. It's like, well, didn't they just have that guy? No. Number one, not as a runner. And number two, definitely not as a receiver. And I don't even think that the Lions have necessarily gotten everything that they can out of Jahmyr Gibbs as a receiver, as like a true route runner on option routes and stuff like that. I think that's actually something they can still mine from him as a player. But I think DeAndre Swift can run like a little swing route and catch the ball out of the backfield and be like a check down guy. So I'm still sort of, like I said, working my way around that signing, maybe just because it happened so fast. It was like literally the first move of free agency. But I wonder if that's like, hey, we're thinking about Caleb Williams already, and like how can we incentivize this guy to take checkdowns? Maybe that's sort of the thought process there. I don't know.
And I think that would be good because like it sounds boring, but it's to your point about Mahomes, where it's like I really think you start to see the good quarterbacks separate themselves into great when they just learn to do stuff like check the ball down.
Yeah.
Like look at Josh Allen. Like Josh Allen, I think it was 2020, he started to like, it was like, oh, he's good. But he was still like kind of out of control, like threw a few too many interceptions, did some really weird stuff in critical downs. But it was clear at that point he was good. The next year, I think in 2021, he started checking the ball down. He started throwing quick game better. It was like, see, you set the floor for yourself. So you can just put yourself in position to go do all the crazy stuff when you really need to at the end of games, because you just put yourself in good positions to go do that more often. I think Caleb, like I said, I think people are worried, because he runs around so much, is he going to be able to adapt to it? I think he's going to take to it really, really well and benefit from actually having people be like, listen, man, this is what we need the offense to do. There's going to be chances for you to go do the crazy, Caleb Williams, I'm Superman stuff. But on 70% of plays, this is just how the offense needs to run. I actually think he's going to take to it really well. I'm not concerned about that whatsoever.
Yeah, that Josh Allen example is a really good one because they're another team that has seemingly been obsessed with like, let's get receiving backs who can do more than just like catch the ball and fall down, right? I mean, Brandon Beane seemed to almost like galaxy brain himself and like he was in such a tizzy about the JD McKissic contract a few years ago. Remember that when like he went back to Washington and was pissed about, we really targeted JD McKissic. Then it's like, well, we got to draft James Cook then. And James Cook's been a pretty good player for them, but still it's like,
and yeah, they wanted to trade for CMC.
Right. Who's the ultimate, like 3 tiers better of everybody I just said if we're putting DeAndre Swift in there, but like he's the picture perfect archetype of that. They traded for Naheem Hines then in the middle of that season. So they've clearly valued that. And maybe DeAndre Swift ends up being like a guy, for your fantasy teams catches like 50 balls this year. Maybe. I don't know because again, I'm still working my head around that signing, but that could be part of like the Caleb Williams profile where they're seeing some of the same things there that we got to get this guy to check the ball down. Hey, this is a player who not a perfect running back for sure, but will catch the ball in space and make plays with it. So that is certainly very possible. Interested in your thoughts just overall about like when we're talking about them setting up an incubator, for a rookie quarterback. Like we're going to try to develop this guy. What are your thoughts on Shane Waldron as an offensive coordinator? Because I thought at early times in his Seattle tenure was very impressed and I was like, hey, Russell Wilson, this is a good offense. Why don't you, speaking of playing in structure, why don't you play in the structure of this offense a little bit more? And then Geno did really well in 22. Last year, it was a little hit and miss to me. Your thoughts just kind of projecting Williams into this offense specifically?
I mean, I like that it's so vertical, assuming they keep most of what they did with Geno. It was, with Geno, it was a lot of like, they did some under center, like drop back play action stuff, but a lot of it was like, hey man, we're going gun 5-step drop and we're going to let Geno rip it. And I actually think that that's kind of what you want Caleb to do, because I think it's going to index into his aggressiveness and then still, I think, give him a lot of just true drop back passing reps, which is what he's going to need coming from an offense that was completely BS, like I said. So I think it would actually, from that sense, would be good from him. What I'm really interested in with Waldron actually is, so Seattle's offensive line was bad last year. Like they were just not good. I don't think Charles Cross was as good as he's been. Abraham Lucas was in and out of the lineup. The interior is just bad. So like I think it was hard for Waldron to piece together the offense with like a fluidity that they wanted it to. I think a lot of the offense was just like, all right, we got Geno and we got 2 really good receivers. We're going to pray that they can do enough to like get us over the line. So we're going to be really aggressive in the drop back passing game. And that's going to be it. I think it was really hard for them to like tie the run game to the pass game because the run game was just so bad and inconsistent. So I think that was a huge issue for them. I think in Chicago, that's not going to be a problem. I think this offensive line it's certainly better than Seattle's, and I think it can probably be above average, especially if they maybe draft one guy to get a replacement in there somewhere, maybe along the interior. That's where I'm really interested to see with Waldron. Like, are they, if they can do that, are they going to do a better job of tying run to pass? The other one thing I want to say about Waldron too, actually, I do think he's above average, by the way. I think he's like a perfectly fine play caller for Caleb. Maybe 2 or 3 times a game, he just calls like a really goofy play, like just like a weird spot where they'll get into like some weird 13 personnel, just this quasi messed up look, and they'll just like get it blown up. And it's like, can you just relax a little bit? Like, let's call the normal plays before we get into all that stuff. So I think he galaxy brains himself a little bit, but I don't know. I think a lot of the non-top 5 play callers do that a lot. So it's not really that big of a deal.
A little bit of like Matt Nagy syndrome there.
Yeah.
That's that. Whenever
fans are used to it, so it'll be fine.
Right. I mean, shoot. Hey, the Chiefs do it at least a different sort of way, but it's just like they do the, all right, do we really need, and it's crazy because, he caught the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl, but like, do we really need the McCole Hardman gadget play here? Do we really need the Kadarius Toney little gadget play here? Probably not. Let's, but at the same time, again, then they win the Super Bowl doing that stuff. So not a good example, but not every team has Patrick Mahomes.
The last thing actually too I want to say about Waldron, to his credit, a lot of people this year were doing, I don't know what you want to call it, like the yo-yo motion where the back goes out and then sometimes he can go back in. You saw this a lot from San Francisco. Where a lot of times they would just push McCaffrey and he wouldn't actually come back in. But you can either do it where you push him all the way out and he runs like a swing, or he, at the snap of the ball, comes back in and you can run with him. Seattle was like kind of on the forefront of that. Like early in the season, they were doing a lot of that stuff. And that to me was like, okay, Waldron is like, he's thinking, like he's trying to get to stuff. Like I said, maybe sometimes he's a little too cute, but like he is at least a guy who seems to be trying to push the envelope a little bit and seeing what's new. I think for a rookie quarterback like Caleb, where you're walking in, like this guy is, he can kind of be whatever you want him to be in a sense. And I think if a coach is like thinking that forward thinking, I think that's an unbelievably cool spot to be in.
Yeah, love this spot just overall for Caleb Williams to be dropped into. So many things to be excited about. Let's talk about the rest of sort of the resources here that Chicago does have, because they still have their own pick, which is 9th overall. They only have 2 other picks, though, beyond that in the NFL draft, which is a little interesting, right? They have the 75th overall pick in the 3rd round. They have the 122nd overall pick in the 4th round, and that's it. They don't have a 5th. They don't have a 6th. They don't have a 7th. Like, they're actually pretty light on draft picks. So at 9th overall, Derek, I think the world is a little bit their oyster there. They're definitely, I think, a trade down candidate, because you'd imagine that they'd like to get some more draft picks here. But at the same time, man, we know that offensive linemen, we know that wide receivers could still be kind of hovering around that area. And that is like, they could, I don't think they need to take another tackle necessarily, but you never know. I mean, they could take one at bench Braxton Jones, move him around. Probably wouldn't what I would do, but it's you can't rule it out. You know that they need another edge rusher, that's for sure. So I don't know, man. What do you think about this 9th overall pick? Because I think, like I said, the world seemed to be a little bit like at their fingertips there.
I think it depends on if they want to win now or 2 or 3 years from now. I think if they want to win now, you take, I don't know, Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, one of the pass rushers, and like get somebody opposite Montez Sweat. That's going to beef you up. And I think that's probably like the easiest place on their defense to slot in a new starter. And it just makes sense with kind of just the way that this draft falls. I think if you just want to make a good situation for the offense and make things great for Caleb, which should be, to me, the goal if you're drafting a guy 1st overall like this, I think you draft just whatever receiver is left. I don't care if it's Neighbors, O'Dunes. Maybe if you have to dip into the next tier and go all the way to Brian Thomas at 9, maybe that's a little bit sticky. But if either of Neighbors or O'Dunes is there, ideally O'Dunes, I would really, really, absolutely love him in this offense. I think he would be a perfect skill set alongside the other 2. I think that would be really, really cool. That would probably be my spot. Is like, I'm thinking probably receiver, pass rusher would be fine, and then maybe look to trade out. And like you said, maybe you go down to 19 and maybe you take one of the guards, or Graham Barton, he can kick in at center, or Jackson Powers Johnson, something like that. You know what I mean? Totally.
I think if they drafted a receiver, that player would kind of be sort of like on the Jackson Smith and Jigba sort of, you're kind of banged in your rookie season, right? In terms of getting targets, because like you're not going to out target DJ Moore and you're probably not going to out target Keenan Allen, but Keenan Allen is 32 years old. He is only on a 1 year, like he's only got 1 year left on his deal. They've talked about extending him. Maybe that's what they do, but they're still really light on that 3rd receiver position. And one thing that I thought was different with Shane Waldron last year than we saw previously was they ran a lot of just like ISO routes. Like just go down there and like win on these routes, and they're not necessarily going to always work off each other. I don't know if that's the coaching that we've talked about recently on the pod with Nate Tice on Mock Draft Monday. Like the wide receiver coaching there maybe wasn't great. That could be a part of it. The spacing didn't always make sense. But if you're going to do that in Chicago and you have like, oh my God, yeah, like a Rome Odunze at your X receiver position, DJ Moore in your off ball sort of flanker, and then Keenan Allen in your slot, you can do that. You can do that with one of these receivers. It's just like that guy from a production standpoint is going to be a little bit capped if that's the pick.
Yeah. And like I said, if I was Chicago, I wouldn't care about that.
Right.
Like, my rookie receiver only had 600 yards. Who cares? We're playing for Caleb to be Mahomes in 3 years. That's what we're playing for. And maybe I don't know what like how Poles and Eberflus feel about their job security or whatever. So like maybe they really, really just want to stress and get that pass rusher so they can just like win this year and keep their jobs. I don't know, but I would really be trying to get O'Dunes or Neighbors if he's there. But like one of those two, you just have like, what else does the offense need? Like obviously you could build the perfect offense and be the greatest show on turf if you want. But like in this world where you have one of the two other, non-Marvin Harrison receivers, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet is a fine tight end. I don't think he's that good, but he's fine. Offensive line is at least average. The running backs are okay. Like you have everything you need for this rookie quarterback to be really, really good, or at least set him up to go on a good trajectory, which again, they shouldn't care about literally anything else.
Yeah. Do you think they make sense as like a Brock Bowers team potentially?
Oh God, man. Oh dude, I would love it so much. I would love it so much. I didn't mention it because I think he falls past this, unfortunately, which is crazy because I think he's the second best player in the class. But
really,
I would love it here because Cole Kmet is okay. If he's your starting tight end, you're not in a bad spot. Brock Bowers, though, that guy. If all we've done the past 5 years, right, is be like, wow, yards after the catch, this is the most important thing any player can do. You know what Brock Bowers does? He's really damn good with the ball in his hands. Mm-hmm. He is very fast, 240 pounds of speed, has really long arms, can catch the ball, kind of helps him maneuver around people when he has to with the ball in his hands. Incredible balance for a player his size. Like I think purely with the ball in his hands, probably the only guy that is comparable is Neighbors. He's just incredibly explosive, but like purely on ball in their hands for their position, it's him and Neighbors, I think, kind of in their own tier.
And that's interesting because we get caught up on the TE designation of the player in terms of like where they're valuable, and certainly like contracts, right? Like people get, he's going to be immediately paid like is this much highest tight end if he's drafted in the top 10. And I get that, but it's a little bit different than the same pushback that maybe myself and other people gave with the Kyle Pitts thing, a few years ago. Like, yeah, he's a TE, but he could do X receiver stuff if you asked him to do it. Yeah, but like you don't really want to ask your tight end to be an X receiver, right? Because even no matter how good they are, and please, chart Kyle Pitts, bros, don't get in my mentions about this. Like, I'm not charting tight ends, period, end of story. I got enough work to do. But I'm not charting Brock Bowers either, so don't get me started on that. But like, it also feels a little different that, hey, this guy's not even, he's a tight end, but he's not really a tight end because we can do these sort of like yards after catch things with him. We can use him as like almost an H-back in ways that maybe San Francisco, like the Shanahan trees use like their fullbacks, like Juszczyk and stuff like that. I know that doesn't sound sexy, like, oh, we're going to draft Kyle Juszczyk 9th overall, but just the ways they can get him the football are a little more, I would say, efficient than we can line up Kyle Pitts at X receiver. And look, that looks pretty good.
I think Nate Tice actually had a great comparison for it. You would kind of use him not that differently from how the Rams use Puka Nacua, where it's like he's either in the slot or like Puka truthfully is like on the ball a lot, like tight to the formation. So you can use him almost as this like half tight end where he's running a lot of like crossers. He's running a lot of, deep over routes. He's running a lot of stuff over the middle of the field where he's just looking for space. Someone's going to get him the ball and he's just going to run like hell with it. I think if you use him a lot like Puka, like Nate said, that's probably your best case scenario. I think some people, are trying to get him. Like you said, it's not like the Kyle Pitts thing where it's like he's not going to go line up at X receiver, which is like such a wonky dynamic, when you have a guy who theoretically should be on the ball as your Y and it's like, oh, we're going to go line him up at X. That is a tougher line to walk than like, oh, our guy who we typically line up as the Y tight end, we're just going to move him off the ball a little bit. It's like, okay, well, that's an easier transition to make because you're kind of just putting him in the same spot. So that's why I'm not really worried about Brock Bowers isn't your typical, prototypical, blah, blah, blah. Dude, Sam Laporta was like the best tight end in the NFL last year, or one of the best three. And he was like 240 pounds, can't throw a block. The teams are figuring it out if you can catch the ball. So
that Puka idea makes a lot of sense to me. I'm going to do stuff with my hands here. So for the YouTube folks, congratulations. You get to see me. It's not even going to be any more impressive when I do it with my hands than it is on the audio form. So I apologize to people that are listening to this, but you think about like Puka told me the Super Bowl, his favorite route to run, his favorite concept was dagger, is like slot outside at that point. You're so close, tight together. Like, and that slot receiver on the line is just going to clear everything out. And he's going to come in and run a dig, a big crossing route, something like that. That makes sense as Brock Bowers is that guy running like he's outside, but he's off the ball, but he's still tight to another player. Those guys are closer to the line of scrimmage. Again, I know this sucks it's a freaking podcast and I'm doing this stuff with my hands. I realize it's not easy to see, but just go look it up. Like whatever, you go Google dagger and think about like where these guys are lined up there. That makes sense to me. And then you're using him as like an exploited yards after catch player. So I don't know. You got my gears turning there on that one. And Shane Waldron comes from this Sean McVay tree as it is. So that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like we have a pretty good vision now, Derrik, about what this offense might look like and our fan fiction about the Brock Bowers selection.
Yeah, I mean, they've got options, man. The more we talked about the Brock Bowers things, I might want that more than anything. But I just don't think it's going to happen. But we'll see. Polls could do something interesting.
We'll see. Like I said, the Bears kind of have the world at their fingertips there at that 9th overall selection. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk through Washington and New England on the other side. All right, we're back. Washington Commanders at the 2nd overall pick, Derrik. And we spent all that time talking about the Bears when, like, we know what they're going to do. We know what's going to happen at the 1st overall pick. It's going to be Caleb Williams. I don't know about you, buddy, but, like, I'm kind of ready to believe anything about Washington as long as that anything is they're taking a quarterback at the 2nd overall pick.
The only thing I'm not going to believe, I don't think Drake Maye would be the pick. Obviously, there hasn't been that much smoke that they're going to take Drake Maye. It feels like we're out. It just feels like it's not happening, which is, to me, insane.
Yeah.
Because I think Caleb and Drake are like a 1A, 1B situation. I think they are both amazing, amazing prospects. The fact that anybody outside of Caleb is even in Drake's stratosphere, to me, is mind-blowing. But there's been a ton of Jayden Daniels smoke to Washington for probably a month now, right? Like probably since the combine. And then just yesterday, Tom Pelissero was like, JJ McCarthy, which to me is even crazier. I don't know. I just can't really figure out exactly what Washington wants to do. I think you're right that it's obviously going to be a quarterback. I don't think they're going to trade down. There was a little bit of smoke that they might, but I don't think that's happening. It's going to be a quarterback. If I were to rank the possibilities, it's probably Jayden. And then I guess I would still say Drake and then JJ. JJ, there's no shot he goes to. That seems impossible to me.
Yeah, I have definitely been at this point. I've said this on the last couple shows. I was already like ready to take the peer pressure, like ready to take that peer pressure on Drake Maye, ready to be completely Drake Maye pilled. And then having Nate Tice on the show on the last episode. And I knew having you on the show. I've read your work on Drake Maye. I know what you think about Drake Maye. You know, the profile's really good on Drake Maye on reception perception, especially compared to some of these other guys. So I don't get it either, bro. I don't get like why he just wouldn't be the 2nd overall pick here. Just tell the people why you think maybe Drake Maye isn't inconsistent. Well, not even just put Washington aside, but like, where are some of the flaws that people have with Drake Maye, and like, what do you buy and not buy?
I think the biggest one people seem to get hung up on is the footwork, which I think is halfway warranted, but like way, way overblown. I think people misunderstand the footwork problem. To me, his biggest footwork problem is when he throws to his right side a lot, he will actually swing. Again, this is just a dumb thing for an audio podcast.
Whatever.
But he'll swing.
We're already past the looking glass on this.
We're already past it there. He'll like swing his right foot like way too far around, and so he'll just end up at like a really tight angle trying to throw to the receivers that he's trying to throw to his right. And I think that just makes the ball come out wonky, and that he just doesn't really get the ball where it needs to go. I think that's his biggest issue. That to me is pretty fixable. That is just like when you get out of your drop back and you transition, you just need to be cleaner with your angles. You just need to be a little bit more put together. That I don't care about. What people seem to be getting hung up on is the fact that he'll like kind of hop around and drift around a lot in the pocket, and they'll say that he like drifts into pressure. I don't see it that way at all, really. I think when he's drifting, it's a lot of like, he knows where the ball needs to go and he's drifting to the side that he's throwing to, which to me is perfectly fine. And then I think there are instances where he'll get like, they'll run like a twist where the defensive end crashes in, something like that. He'll see that color flash in front of his eyes and he'll drift kind of away from the defensive end crashing in. Well, naturally, the defensive tackle is going to loop outside and end up getting into that space. And people will be like, oh, he's drifting into pressure. But it's like, I think he's just making himself clean from the first threat, which is perfectly fine if the ball gets out anyway. And guess what? It usually does. So I don't really care like that he's potentially drifting himself into the pressure by the end of the throw. If he's buying himself enough time to get the throw off initially, I don't care what it looks like at the end. And I think he does a really, really good job of that, actually, of actually getting himself space in the first place to get off throws that he needs to. So it seems like footwork is really the big thing that people are getting hung up on. I think the accuracy too it's not perfect. I think he sprays like 2 or 3 throws a game, but
for sure.
I think if you threw any of Jayden Daniels, Jayden McCarthy, basically anybody but Caleb into this North Carolina offense where the offensive line is disgusting and you have like a half of an NFL player that you're throwing to, you would probably spray more balls because it's just a tougher environment to consistently make those throws when people aren't open that much and you're constantly under pressure. So I think that's a thing that people are just kind of missing. I think especially when you compare him to Jayden Daniels, who is a 5-year starter who was playing with 2 first-round receivers. You're comparing him to JJ McCarthy, who was on a national championship winning team. Obviously, JJ did his part, but like this is a very, very good, stable environment for him to be in. He was able to win a game throwing 9 passes. That's not conceivable for Drake Maye. You know what I mean? So I think people are just kind of like misunderstanding some of the bad plays that Drake had, and not like calculating for like how bad the situation was relative to some of his peers in this class.
Yeah, I mean, I watched a lot of North Carolina because I was a big Josh Downs fan the year prior. The offense doesn't look anything like that this year. Like, and I'm not even saying it was perfect in 22, but it from a smooth operation standpoint is nothing like the 2 units could not be, in my opinion, any more different. So clearly you and I are Drake Maye guys. I'm with you. Like, all I want in the world is just Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson to have Drake Maye. That's all I want. I'm trying to like hold out hope to the last minute that that's what we're going to get, but let's put ourselves in a position to think about the other options here. I'll say this. I don't even think we need to pretend with the JJ McCarthy stuff. Maybe this take ages like milk, but this is GM Adam Peters came from the same front office that had everybody convinced they were going to take Mac Jones third overall a few years ago. And also this is one of those reports where like, it's at least when I was reading it or listening to it from Tom Pelissero, was like, he's calling up other guys and be like, hey, what do you think Adam Peters is going to do? And they're like, yeah, I mean, he's come from a Shanahan tree. JJ McCarthy. That's what, like, to me, that doesn't really pass the sniff test. Maybe that ages like milk, but let's talk about Jayden Daniels in this offense. Cause I have heard people say, and I can kind of squint at this, Derek, that, Jayden Daniels in a Cliff Kingsbury offense, that should really work out well. I don't know that if I'm Washington, I don't know if I'm trying to make decisions on like Cliff Kingsbury's offense, but put that aside for a second. Can you envision that as like something that would work out given what you know about Jayden Daniels as a player?
I want to say really quickly before I get to Daniels, Ben Solak made a great point about this. People are like, oh, Jayden or whoever can fit into this Cliff Kingsbury offense. It's an air raid. You know what Drake Maye did last year? Air raid offense. Right. Why do we think this isn't a fit? You guys are being ridiculous. But anyway, on to Jayden. I actually think Jayden he does fit the offense, I think, because I think Jayden's best throws, like the best areas that he throws the ball, are within the like 1 to 10 yard range, especially outside the numbers. So that's going to be a lot of your like flat routes, curl routes, speed outs, stick routes, that sort of stuff, which that is all going to be very, very, consistent in a Cliff Kingsbury offense. Like
the horizontal raid from Arizona.
Horizontal raid, man. Like that stuff is all going to be there in the offense. And I think Jayden throws that stuff really, really well, especially like outside the hashes. And then down the field, he obviously having Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors who just win down the field a lot is going to help. But there are definitely instances where like those guys are not fully open and he is just right in a bucket. Just puts it right there for them to go get. And I do think he is a really good, beautiful deep passer. So I think just between some of his quick game operation, especially outside the hashes, that's actually the thing I want to mention with Jayden Daniels. Over the middle, he kind of struggles hitting guys in stride a little bit. Like that's not really his best throw. But when guys are just like kind of stationary, like on those stick routes, on those hitch and curl routes and stuff, money every time. Like the timing, the placement is just fantastic. Obviously, that's going to be a big part of this offense. So I think if they can get that stuff together and really build that around him, I think it could look okay just in terms of like the passing concepts, his operation of it. Where I struggle with this offense is the offensive line and Jayden Daniels playing behind this offensive line. Because the whole big thing with Jayden Daniels is his pressure to sack ratio is disgusting. Like if he gets pressured, he is getting sacked. If he gets pressured, he's not throwing the ball. Like I forget what the number is, but he's also a guy where a lot of his pressures don't turn into pass attempts either. Like they're either sacks or he's running, which is a pretty tough way to play, especially in the NFL. Like even like, I think people probably imagine that Lamar Jackson's like that. Lamar's not like that at all. Like you remember the moments where he does go run under pressure and stuff like that. But he actually is very much someone who is eyes up, looking to throw, blah, blah, blah. It's really a lot closer to like Jalen Hurts is like this. Justin Fields is like this. And these are players that can function, right? But it doesn't feel the same as watching a top 5 quarterback. And that's really where I struggle with Jayden Daniels. And I think that aspect of his game is only going to be heightened when you play behind an offensive line that like, is their best player Tyler Biotish?
Right.
Like that's a bad spot to be in. Who they just signed, by the way. Like that's a really, really bad spot to be in. So I think it's just a really, really tough spot for Jayden Daniels, just in terms of like, you know, what does this player need when he comes into the NFL? Well, he needs a top 10 offensive line to like incubate him away from his worst traits. He's going to be stepping into probably a bottom 5 offensive line and kind of exacerbate what I think is his worst trait. So that's really where I worry with this.
You know, it's not too dissimilar to like Sam Howell last year, where look, Sam Howell took a lot of sacks and it's like, he's not getting good protection. Yeah, he's not getting good protection. He's also making that problem a lot more worse than it needs to be. And honestly, the offensive line is worse on paper, I think, maybe right now than it was last year. I mean, because they lose Charles Leno at left tackle. I don't know what they're really doing at that position. Andrew Wiley was fine at right tackle last year. It was like fine, I guess. Sam Cosmi's all right. So like, yeah, Tyler Biotish is probably their best offensive lineman. He's one of the like many players that they signed in free. They threw just a ton of like not big tier money around, but just like, hey, we got to get some players in here. Okay. Like they signed a ton of guys. But yeah. Okay. So I'm with you that I feel like there could be moments if Jayden Daniels is the pick here. There could be moments where this offense looks really exciting just because, I mean, I do think the receivers are good. Like, I think Terry McLaurin is good. I think Jahan Dotson, I mean, like, fantasy Twitter hates him now. I think he's still a good player. But they need more receiver depth than that, too. Like, beyond that, they bring back Jamison Crowder. Like, De'Ami Brown is still on the offense. Like, they need more receiver talent. Luckily, Derek, they have a lot more picks than just the second overall selection. They have a ton of draft picks. They have 5 picks in rounds 2 and 3, thanks to some trades. They have the second pick from the Bears. They have a 3rd round pick from the Seahawks and the 49ers. So they're in a wide receiver rich draft. They could add another receiver. They could potentially beef up the offensive line. So I don't know, man. I can get to a spot where I see what they're seeing with Jayden Daniels. I'm just not sure that I would make that pick.
That's kind of how I feel about it. Like, I don't think Jayden Daniels is a terrible prospect. I think he's still, you know, for me, late first round, I think that's where this prospect typically would go. He's just been like inflated because Heisman season, all that other jazz. But I do think he's a fine prospect. Like I said, I think he's a really good athlete. I think he throws well down the field. I think generally he's one of the more accurate, clean, consistent throwers in this class. He doesn't put the ball in harm's way, which I think is a really nice trait. It's just, when I look at Daniels, I watch his film and I'm like, I don't know how many like high level NFL throws are here. And then I watch the pocket management and I'm like, I don't know if this looks like any of the guys in the top 10, just in terms of like how he's able to throw with bodies around him. If he's willing to do that at all, you know, his movement in the pocket instead of just bailing, that's where I get worried. And then, like I said, you know, with the offensive line, it's just a tough spot. So I do think if they could get a little bit more size at the receiver position, maybe get one more offensive lineman who can start, like maybe this can be okay. But I do think with a quarterback like Daniels, it's going to be a much finer line to walk for sure.
They have the makings of a good run game too, I think. And for all the crap that we shovel on Cliff Kingsbury, like those offenses were good run offenses in Arizona. And Jayden Daniels obviously brings a rushing dynamic. This is typically what I think teams have started to come around to now, Derek, at the quarterback position, which is like mobility allows you to set the floor for your quarterback and allows you to set the floor of your offense. Like there's a chance that very Arizona-esque with Cliff Kingsbury, the first like 7 to 8 games look pretty good. with Jayden Daniels and this run game, and like, hey, we're throwing down the field. We're throwing stick routes to Jahan Dotson. We're throwing down the field to Terry McLaurin. Maybe we have one more receiver here. Like I can picture that, but I just wonder if they'll, you mentioned Jalen Hurts, you mentioned Justin Fields. Like I wonder if they'll get to a point where even with Sam Howell last year, very different type of player, but you get to a point down late in the season and even especially into these guys' career like Hurts and Fields where you're just like, you're butting heads on a ceiling there. You're running up against a wall because there's not like a next level to take here. But again, this is all hypothetical.
I'm glad you bring up the run game, though, because I think that should be their biggest lesson from last year. They threw the ball more than any other team in the NFL last year. Your quarterback was Sam Howell, and you don't have an offensive line.
Yeah,
like that's to me like actually what happened with Howell is like the first 2-3 months of the season. It was like, okay, he's not great, but you see the flashes, right? You see the moments. There would be drives where you're like, maybe, like I can see it. And then by the end of the year, it just seemed like because they were just asking him to drop back and drop back and drop back like he was 2010 Matthew Stafford, he just like eventually broke because like, you know what I mean? Just like bullet hell, just completely did not know how to play the position anymore because he was just so scarred by the end of the year. I think they cannot make that same mistake. Like at least with Howell, it was like 5th round pick. We're just seeing what we got. Whatever.
Totally.
If you're making that investment at 2nd overall, that's very different. And I think you need to protect him better. And I think they need to be able to run the ball, not with Daniels. Obviously, they'll use him, but like they need to have a good run game even outside of him. And they need to be able to lean on it and not ask Daniels to drop back 40 times a game like they were when you can't do that stuff unless you have one of the best quarterbacks in the league. So I hope that's the lesson they take, is that they just run the ball better. And to your point, Cliff did put together really good run games in Arizona. Like people talk about, him in the passing game. His run game stuff is like pretty cool, dude.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like Chase Edmonds was the guy that was averaging over 5 yards a carry. And like Chase Edmonds, fine, right? Like I think Austin Eckler could do like a facsimile of Chase Edmonds, like at this point in Austin Eckler's career. I think Brian Robinson can bring sort of that power element that James Conner did at different times. So like there's definitely something there from a run game perspective. And again, Jayden Daniels will bring that with his legs, but that's such a great point, man, about the Sam Howell stuff. And I try to not do too much Sam Howell revisionist history because Washington fans were on my ass last year about Sam Howell and just like, look at the stats. Like, yeah, man, but this offense is a disaster, man. And I think a lot of that was on Eric Bieniemy and the coaching staff as well, because like not only were they having him drop back so much, Derek, they're also having him do like so many RPOs, and he's not like an RPO quarterback necessarily. I mean, we see like Gardner Minshew run an RPO offense, and I mean, he's definitely not a run threat, but like it gets to a point with your quarterback where you just need to give this guy a mental breather. Like you need to give him some snaps off where he's just like, just turn around and hand the ball off or whatever. So you're not up there at the line of scrimmage like, okay, I know I'm dropping back. I know I'm probably going to get pressure here. I know I'm not really good at setting my pressures, but I got to set my pressure over here. Also, by the way, like we're doing an RPO. So like you could just see the cartoon of the steam like coming out of Sam Howell's ear from just the gears turning too fast. That's a recipe for a disaster of an offense.
Yes, that was my biggest issue with them last year, and that's 100% what I'm saying. Is like you got to a point with Howell where it was just 8,000 things are going on in his head, and it's like, yeah, you can't play that way when you're 10-year veterans can't play that way when they're thrown into that situation, let alone a guy who's a 5th round pick, 2nd-year player. Like that it was never going to work. So like we both said at this point, I hope that's the lesson they learned this year is like, hey man, let's give the quarterback a couple of plays off every now and then. Let him just ease into the game and stay prepared.
Any other spots like that we haven't hit from this roster in terms of like places they could address? Because I think we kind of hit the offense, and to me, I think like you hire Dan Quinn, you're probably just going to like, hey, let's make it work on that side of the ball while we try to build up the offense around Jayden Daniels or Drake Maye if it ends up still being Drake Maye.
I think with their other top 100 picks, they really need to target offensive line. I mean, they could probably use a new starter at every position. I know they just signed a couple of guys to start, but like even the guys they signed to start are not that great. So theoretically, you could get some guys to go in and develop. Like I said, a little bit more size outside a receiver. Defensively, dude, I think you could take literally anything. Like every single position is on the board for this team outside of defensive tackle, unless they want to do like a contingency plan. But I think the roster is so bad, they can't really afford that luxury to have contingency for guys like Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen. I think they have to just go get starters. So that could be pass rusher. That could be, they're probably not going to get a new linebacker with Luvu and Bobby Wagner and Jamin Davis. But I think anywhere in the secondary, they could use a guy. So they are just a team where I think offensive line and then somewhere in the secondary is probably their best bets for trying to put together a roster that can be competent this year.
All right, let's talk our final team here in the top 3, and it's the New England Patriots at number 3. They are the one team to me, like I said, that I think could trade out of this spot. You know, if the Vikings want to come up and give them a big offer. So I'll just say this, like to start this discussion off, Derrik Klassen, let's say I appoint you GM of the New England Patriots. You have 2 options here. You can either A, take a quarterback, and it's going to be the third best, theoretically, right? Like we think Drake Maye is maybe the second best or right there with Caleb Williams, but whatever. But for all intents and purposes, you can take quarterback 3 and drop him onto this offense, which for whatever we just said about Washington, New England's definitely got it worse. They don't have a lot of players there on the offensive side of the football. You can either just, let's start the rookie quarterback, let's start the development, let's get him in the building. Maybe we're not playing him right away, but we're going to try to Jordan Love this thing, Patrick Mahomes this thing, whatever. Let's get him in the building. Or do you try to trade down and recoup assets and like build up this roster and just let Jacoby Brissett kind of hold the fort for a year?
My caveat is if May is there at 3, I'm taking him before they even realize I'm on the clock. Like I really think that he's that good. And I don't have to go into it again. I really think he's incredible. And I think even in a less than ideal situation, I think he'd be a guy who could weather it and come out okay on the other side. So I'm not that worried about that there. I think if it's anybody else, if it's Jayden, if it's JJ McCarthy, I would rather trade down, dude. Because I really think we are to a point with quarterback development and all that stuff where we understand that like you can't throw most guys into the fire on a situation that is this bad and expect them to figure it out. Obviously, you'll get a couple of you'll get your Trevor Lawrences, who was a generational prospect, by the way, who can just like weather Urban Meyer and still come out a top 10 quarterback. But that's really rare. And I think that's especially rare when you're talking about the 3rd or 4th quarterback in a given class, even if it is a good class. So I would be really, really scared about throwing any of those guys into this situation. I think JJ McCarthy is going to need a year no matter where he plays. Like even if he gets to Minnesota, which is the ideal landing spot for anybody, I think he probably needs a season anyway. And then Jayden Daniels, I think if you throw him into this spot where he doesn't really have any receivers who can win down the field consistently or at all. And then an offensive line that is, I think they have a couple of decent players. Like I think Micah Nwenu, when he is healthy, is good. I think Cole Strange is a perfectly fine guard, but it's not a great offensive line. And I think that would probably be an issue especially for Jayden and a little bit for JJ. So I don't know. This is, to me, feels like a situation where almost because you are like, the Bill Belichick era is over, I actually don't think there's like an immediate rush to be like, oh, we have to get back and we have to. I think there is probably a little bit of an understanding in the building of like, that was a really cool 2 decades, but like this is probably going to take some time to figure out what we want to be again. We're going to give Jerod Mayo that time. We don't necessarily need to draft the quarterback. So if it were me, I would love to go get some assets, go get some blue chippers with a couple of top 20 picks, see what you can do.
I wonder about how they feel in the building, because no matter what, like Patriots fans have just been spoiled now at this point, right? Like, I mean, and you even see it like when I decide I hate myself enough and like I want to scroll through Twitter comments, which maybe happens more than I'd like it to. I'm a work in progress, baby. I'm not perfect. Okay. So every now and again, I'll click on stuff, and it's just like, sometimes I see what people say under the Jerod Mayo, like even press clippings from the owners meeting, right? Like this guy talks too much, like blah, blah. What are we, so people already seem like not totally not fully invested in the Jerod Mayo era. And like, let's be honest, Derrik, if, Robert Kraft goes up to the guys that making the decisions here, Elliot Wolf and Jerod Mayo is like, I want a quarterback. Like, I don't want to do Jacoby Brissett for a year. They'll just take a quarterback. So there's always that pressure of it that But I'm with you that if I was making the decision, if we were doing this, like a joint decision here, I think we could come to an agreement and be like, the best thing for us is probably not to throw a Jayden Daniels or a JJ McCarthy into this situation. I even for me, I would still worry about Drake Maye in this situation just because like the tackle position, I mean, is not great. These receivers, like Kendrick Bourne's a nice 3, but he's coming off an ACL. Like Demario Douglas, I think I like Demario Douglas as a player, but there is nothing from that LSU offense, like nothing that those guys did from the receiver position that maps to Demario Douglas's game at all. If like you're taking Jayden Daniels, okay, and then it's like Juju Smith-Schuster, they signed KJ Osborne, who's like a nice 4, maybe like your 4th most important pass catcher, and like these are the guys that are rolling out there, the receiver position. Man, it's just tough to imagine a young player having success in this particular situation.
I think 100%. And yeah, I think we've just, they're just, you cannot throw, like I said, a guy into this spot. Like I still would take Drake Maye because I think he's that good. But I do think he would look a lot worse here. And you would have like a higher risk of him maybe not figuring out some of the things that he needs to figure out in a spot like this, as opposed to if he miraculously lands in Minnesota or whatever. Like if he goes to Minnesota, I am like fully booking Hall of Fame. Like he's going to be so good if he lands in Minnesota, dude.
Yeah.
But with New England, I think to your point, it's a little bit sketchier. At least with Maye, I think of him so highly that I will eat the risk anyway. When you get to, like I said, when you get to Jayden Daniels and JJ McCarthy, it's just a tougher spot to be in. I think there's almost maybe a workaround logic you could get yourself into JJ McCarthy though, where it's like, well, if we're going to sit him for a year anyway, then does it matter if we take him a 3rd overall? Because then like he's just going to sit anyway and we're not worried about killing him the first year. So I could see it from that angle, but I don't think Jayden Daniels is going to be a guy you sit. So like to me, it would be like, it's either Maye or McCarthy, or you're going to go get Jayden Daniels killed, or we're just going to, like we both said and I think agreed on, go get a couple of blue chippers. Let's build a competent roster first, and then we'll figure out the quarterback thing later, which is not as fun of like a thing to do because you kind of, you're eating your vegetables and you're trying to take all the right steps, no shortcuts. That sucks. Like everyone just wants to go draft the franchise quarterback, but it's just not that easy. It's not that simple.
And I think it's really hard if you think JJ McCarthy is a guy that needs to sit a year. And like, it's so easy to say, hey man, like Patrick Mahomes sat, hey man, Jordan Love, like he sat for years and then he was really good in his first year starting. Well, okay. One of those teams had, Aaron Rodgers, 2-time MVP. The other had Alex Smith, who's like perfectly fine starter, actually had his like best season there in 2017. I like Jacoby Brissett as a backup quarterback. Like, I'm not afraid to admit, I like watching Jacoby Brissett play football. I don't think he's having a 2017 Alex Smith season on this roster. So, by week 8, if he has a game where he throws, even if it's just like, he threw for 150 yards and 1 touchdown, 1 pick, and 6 yards per attempt, and they scored 14 points, people are going to be like, throw JJ McCarthy out there. How could it possibly be worse? Well, it might not be worse on paper, but it could get worse for your young quarterback.
Exactly. Like that's the part that I think people miss is like this. I think especially in this day and age, like we got to a point, it seemed like, where after the 2011 CBA, where we were just like, didn't know what to do with quarterback development. And it seems like now that we're so far removed from it and understand like the restrictions and all that, and like understand that a lot of these young players in college are, 1, coming from offenses that are completely BS, or 2, just very young players. Like JJ McCarthy is very young. Drake Maye is very young. Caleb Williams is very young. Like these guys, even if they are awesome prospects, you're probably just not going to be like that kind of good until you're 25, 26. Like it's hard to be that kind of like NFL mature until you get there. And so I think we're coming back around a little bit to a point where we understand where it's like, all right, if we need to sit guys, we need to sit guys. If we need to do everything we need to do to make sure this guy is okay year 1, we're going to do it. Like, we're not just going to throw these guys to the fire anymore. I think we understand that like this takes a little bit more time and care than just like, we think the player's good, we'll draft him in 4th overall, he'll figure it out. It's like, it's just not that easy.
No, definitely not that easy. And definitely not that easy when you're just looking at this roster on paper and like, we know what they need. Do you think they need anything on defense? I mean, it's not like a set it and forget it unit necessarily, but it's just the offensive needs are so drastic, and they're not. They could obviously trade down, but right now they just have like, I think, one pick in every round except the 6th, where they have 2 6th-round picks.
I think one more corner would be nice, but when you have a shutdown guy, if he can be healthy, in Christian Gonzalez, and then just the way that they piece together the rest of the defense, they will probably be fine there. I think they'll take a step back this year just from obviously not having Bill. I think it's going to hurt, but they'll probably still be like a 8 to 12 unit in that sense, and just be pretty solid. I think really, it's got to be the offense. Like, could probably use 2 or 3 new offensive line starters. You could use an entirely new receiving core. I mean, that's the thing. If you had Jayden Daniels, dude, he legitimately had a better receiving core at LSU. And like, that's a joke thing we say sometimes, but he had 2 first-round picks. Kyron Lacey is really not bad. Like, he might get drafted in the late rounds. And then their tight end, Mason Taylor, is like an NFL player. Like, he was throwing to what is probably a better receiving core than what New England has. And so they could use pretty much everything there. So yeah, it's got to be the offense, and it's got to be up front, I think, especially.
Okay, so final note here, and then we'll close out. It seems like Minnesota's the natural trade up team, and not the next one, but I don't even know my schedule at this point. But at some point in the teams that shape the draft series, we're doing the lurking quarterback teams, which to me is Minnesota, it's Denver, it's Las Vegas. Minnesota, obviously, I think, has the most draft capital to move up here, and clearly, I think you're saying this is the best landing spot. If New England does decide to be the first team that trades down, is it Minnesota or bust, or is there another team you could see coming up this high?
Denver. I think Sean Payton
what are they going to give up, though, to get up here?
Everything. It's Sean Payton, dude. He'll burn it to the ground to go get, God forbid, JJ McCarthy or whoever it is. I think if Sean Payton goes up, I think if May is there at 3, it's gonna be an unbelievable cost to get there, because I think there's just going to be a huge bidding war between Denver and Minnesota. Maybe somebody else, maybe like a Las Vegas, something like that. But I think if May is there in particular, there is going to be an outrageous bidding war to get there. I don't think it's likely, but like, there is a possibility New York feels a little bit of heat and knows that somebody's going to jump, and maybe they try to jump to 3. I think that feels less likely, but I think that's also on the table. But yeah, I think it's Minnesota and then Denver, and then I think the possibilities start dwindling from there.
Yeah, I mean, they have their first round pick this year. They don't have a second this year, but they do have a 3rd rounder. They also have their first round picks, in the next future years. So that's really what we could be looking at here. And maybe like a player, like a Patrick Surtain type, you want to trade him. Did you see Sean Payton? They asked him at the owners meeting, league meetings, whatever you want, it's supposed to be called this week. They asked him, was it a hard decision? You got to take all that dead cap. Was that a hard decision to move on from Russell Wilson? And he just goes, like, finishes drinking his water, goes, nope. That was all he said.
I did not see that, but now I need to go find the clip, dude. Sean Payton is, listen, man, whatever you want to say about him, he is just like unabashedly who he is. And I kind of respect that.
Yeah, he is Sean Payton. That is for sure. So I'm with you. If the Minnesota Vikings, for whatever reason, aren't the team to trade up here, just because Sean Payton's like, whatever that was last year, we ain't doing that again, and we're not really just gonna roll, because they just got like Jarrett Stidham, man. They're desperate.
They don't have a Jacoby Brissett or even a Gardner Minshew. They have a Jarrett Stidham. That's not happening. They are taking somebody.
Yeah, they don't even have a Sam Darnold where like there's I don't know what your Sam Darnold evaluation is, but there's like a pocket of freaks that we're friends with, but there's like a pocket of freaks on Twitter that like love Sam Darnold, that still believe. I don't know where you are on Sam Darnold, but like you can at least like sell some Sam Darnold hopium to 10% of the population. Ain't nobody buying that smack about Jarrett Stidham at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Like Sam Darnold intrigues me, but I know what he is, and he's probably never going to be what he can be, but he intrigues me. And that's the thing. Like, you can sell people on like the 8%, like maybe he could do something. Jarrett Stidham, it's like, what is the best outcome here? He's quarterback 25, and then what? Yeah. Like, who cares? Like, it doesn't do anything. They don't even have like a Sam Howell where it's like, okay, we have this, really young guy who threw a ton in college. Maybe we can just throw him out there and see what happens. Super arm talent, blah, blah, blah. Jarrett Stidham isn't even that. Jarrett Stidham has been around for like 6 years and has never been good at any point in those 6 years. So it's like, yeah, they just have nothing to even sell. They're going to get somebody. So I think they're going to try their darndest to go up and get Maye, maybe McCarthy, whatever. I think if they have to settle for a Bo Nix, they're going to settle for a Bo Nix. Like, they need something.
Man. Yeah, they're going to be a fascinating team to break down when we do that episode of Teams That Will Shape the Draft. Well, Derrik, appreciate you, man. I feel like we covered these top 3 teams about as thoroughly as you possibly can. And again, they're the tone setters for the draft. Everything, quite literally, trickles down from there. So critical stuff here. Great stuff from Derrik on these top 3 teams, on these quarterbacks as well. Really appreciate the perspective there. Tell the people what you're working on, where they can find your work, and what they need to check out from you heading into the NFL draft.
Yeah, first of all, you guys can find me on Twitter at QBClass with a K. Obviously, I have all my quarterback charting stuff over at Matt's site, Reception Perception. We are doing some Bo Nix stuff this week, and then I think Michael Penix and then Spencer Rattler. So that's kind of the rough schedule we got going on there. And then over at Bleacher Report, myself and the rest of the scouting department just have all of our scouting reports up to like, I think we have like almost 300 grades in at this point. We've got a pretty full board, so we're definitely looking good. And so I do all the skill players over there, but we have a great host of guys who do all the other positions. So definitely go check that out.
Awesome. Can't wait to check all that out. Definitely interested in the Spencer Rattler breakdown after I saw you posting some tweets about him last night. And I just was working on Xavier Legette recently too. So I'm definitely interested to see what you have to say about Spencer Rattler. So make sure you check all that out from Derrik. Again, yeah, you can find him on Twitter, QBClass with a K. In the meantime, that's going to do it for us today. We're back on Thursday with Charles McDonald to go through the running back class. I know nothing about the running back class, so Charles is definitely going to educate me and all of you out there. Until then, we're out.